Hello, my name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy of the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone affected. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter @TheFortuneSOC. Today's show is entitled 2019 Year in Review, Criminal Justice Reform and Beyond, and this is the second part of our show. In last month's episode, in part one, we talked about the fact that 2019 was a year of huge changes within the criminal justice reform movement. Our four guests last month, who will join us again today to continue the discussion, are executive leaders who have been directly impacted by these changes, and each has thoughts about what 2020 will bring. Our guests today, and once again, are Julio Medina, founder and CEO of Exodus Transitional Community, Deanna R. Hoskins, who is the president and CEO of Just Leadership USA, Vivian D. Nixon, who is the executive director of College and Community Fellowship, and Stanley Richards, executive vice president of the Fortune Society. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Both Sides of the Bars. Welcome. Good to have you all back again. I know it's been a brief period since we've been back, and so I'm just so excited that you're all back again. I want to get right into it, right? Because there's been some things that's been changing since our last conversation. And I think one of the more pressing things that's kind of arose within the last maybe 4 to 6 weeks or so since our show was this issue of bail reform. We talked about bail reform before, its importance, why it's needed. Yet some detractors have come, right, as a result of bail reform owing to some incidences. So I want to start around the conversation around bail reform, what's happened in the last few weeks or so. And I'll start with you, Vivian.
Sure. I'm going to defer to Deanna for the details, but the context is really what's important to me. So we've always known that mass incarceration in the United States has a historical connection to structural and systemic racism. And so let's think about what happened when slavery was abolished, right? People didn't just wake up and say, okay, slavery's abolished, everybody, let's make sure everybody has, what they need. And no, there was a fight about that, right? There were certain people who did not want slavery to be abolished. And so the rollbacks came in the form of a set of laws called the Black Codes. And, there were years and years of different processes that really replicated the idea of slavery. That's exactly what's happening with bail reform. Bail reform has happened. It has given freedom to a lot of people who some people don't want to see free. And those rollbacks are a natural occurrence because we are still driven by the same spirit of structural and systemic racism that drove us to have mass incarceration in the first place.
And you mentioned rollbacks, Vivian, and Deanna, talk to us a little bit about this rollbacks. What is that about?
So what you have is you have the DAs and judges who really, as Vivian said, don't want certain individuals released. So I want to start where Vivian left off when you talk about the history of slavery and you look at the release or oppression coming out in different forms. I say it goes back and changes clothes and says I'm a new, but I'm still a new form of oppression that still resembles the past. So when you think about bail reform, think about slavery, where slave masters took you from the family and sold you on the auction block. Bail bondsmen is taking you from the slave master, putting you on the auction block, selling you back to your family. So the system still looks the same. But here in New York, what we have is we have DAs, we have the director of the commissioner of DOC, and judges who really don't want to see this happen. So they're using fear-mongering tactics. So there's been cases where individuals have been released, judges saying, I couldn't hold them because of the bail. The legislation does not say no cash bail. It incorporated the 8th Amendment of the Constitution that says bail should be compatible with my ability to pay. So when you see judges calling the media to actual courts in the Bronx, Manhattan, but they're not calling the media to the courts in Brooklyn. So it's okay for those people to utilize this new legislation to go free. But certain individuals from more impoverished communities, they're highlighting. And they're using fear-mongering tactics because they do have other tools to use. Nothing says you can't hold them on cash bail, or you can't look at insinuating circumstances of their previous history of showing up.
Right.
The one case, literally the guy had violated probation by even getting a charge, and the judge chose not to hold him on the detainer or the violation probation. And that's just their pushback on this bail reform. And that's really what it is. Nothing has actually handicapped them to that extreme if there are really extenuating circumstances. You just can't hold a person on bail on a level they can't pay, but there are other forms of bail. Right. The rollbacks, I think it's important to understand the biggest thing about the rollbacks, and they're actually looking at New Jersey. Well, what New Jersey did was incorporate risk assessment tools. Well, what we know is that risk assessment tools have been proven to be racially biased.
Right, sure.
So what's going to happen is the same individuals who we were fighting for their freedom are still going to be caught up in this system of incarceration. And we actually, again, it just changed its clothes and it looked different, and it came back out in bail reform with risk assessments. But black and brown bodies are still going to be detained.
Sure.
And we have to be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about bail reform, right? Bail reform is about folks who have not been convicted of anything. They have been charged with a crime. And we're either going to be upholding the principles of this system, right? System of you are innocent until you're proven guilty, right? That you have your day in court. That what bail is designed to do is to ensure your return, that you stand before the judge in the court for your particular case. If we're going to uphold those principles, we ought not be thinking about like who gets bail and who doesn't get bail. We should have a system that is about assuring people come back to court, and that's it. It's not about preventing crime. It's not about who gets released and who doesn't, because we know when bail is used, those who can afford to pay it, and it's usually not black and brown people, they end up getting released, and those who are poor end up staying in for years on years while they get their case adjudicated, while they are incarcerated and have not been convicted of anything. So we need to stay focused on what bail reform and bail is really about, and making sure that we are bringing justice to a system that has been so unjust for so many people.
Right, because when you think about injustice, right, someone who may be wealthy and is a threat to society, right? They may have murdered someone or whatever, they can go be released on bail, yet someone who's poor and not a threat will be kept in because they can't make bail or whatever. Right. So that imbalance, consistent with what you've articulated around the historical context, Vivian, Deanna, is important. And you know, obviously, Julio, I know you had some thoughts on that too.
No, but I think everything what my colleague said was excellent. I mean, I just wanted to touch on the black codes, because when we're looking at this, the sensationalism that we're seeing around the media hype on these few cases that they're saying, you know what? This is what we want you to see, because we know as people in the city as big as New York with 9 million people, we love something sensational. Right? We want to look at it and we want to say, wow, change that. We let some, actually 40% of the people that were held on Rikers Island in the past had a bail of less than $2,000. Wow. 40%. You sit there for years, and we know the cases, and there were many of them. And most of them were people of color. So I think when we look at bail reform, you know, this is week 3 into bail reform, and already, you know, we see folk want to change everything about it, and quote unquote, we can't roll that back. Because I think as we start rolling that back, we're going to lose all the momentum and all the progress that advocates and so many others have given their lives for these changes, to the Khalif Browders, to all the folk that were part of a system that was just destructive, that was inherently evil. We can't allow that to continue to go on. So I think just the sensationalism around it, how do we as advocates, of people of color, make sure that this is front and center and we don't lose sight of it. We understand there's some, you know, prosecutors may have some concerns about how this is being rolled out, but the bottom line is you should have had those concerns for the last 100 years as we languish in these prison cells forever. So I just think there's a connection, and that connection, you know, again, Viv, you were so on point just when we think about black codes, because we see how that's connected, right? We put these barriers in place. We see it around the vote. We see it in Florida right now, you know. We see it in Kentucky, I believe, right? We're seeing these barriers put in place after 25% of the population that were once justice involved now have the right to vote. They say, well, wait a minute. You need an ID card. That's right. Oh, wait a minute, you need to pay your fines. You know? So I just think, you know what I'm saying? So I just think there's a connection And that connection, we can't allow it to muff our voices. We can't allow it to continue to be this narrative, this single narrative of, you know, the worst moment that someone was on bail and did something. There's 95% of other people who return back to court.
Sure.
Let's focus on those 95%. I think that's what's important.
I had the opportunity to get some numbers from DOC in terms of how many people were released prior to January 1st.
And DOC is Department of Corrections.
Department of Correction, New York City Department of Correction. Prior to January, there was a little over 6,000 people in the system. Right now, we are under 5,500 people as a result of the January 1 bail reform.
Wow.
DOC has said at least 800 people have been released underneath the new bail reform. But we hear 3 or 4 cases that are being elevated and shown. Like, this is why we shouldn't have bail reform. But we had over 800 people released that are doing the right thing, that are going to court, that are trying to have their cases adjudicated in a system that professes to be fair and just.
And it's not so much about the idea of like, I mean, the 3 or 4 people that have been lifted up in the media as like contributing negatively to this idea of bail reform had mental health issues, right? So the idea is, right, and I think Mayor de Blasio kind of like raised this. He said something to the effect that it's not bail reform legislation that's at the issue.
That's right.
It's New York City's failure to have like adequate mental health services to engage people. I think that was profound, right?
Yes.
Because it's true.
It was profound, but welcome to New York City, Mr. Mayor. How long have you known that? Because we haven't seen a whole lot of traction to try to fix the lack of mental health services
That's
in New York
exactly
City, or homelessness, or any of the other problems
Right.
Under his purview.
Sure. Deanna, I know you want to say something. And then I want to kind of go right into like voting. Because I know voting like dovetails with like all of this stuff, bail reform and all that stuff too.
So I just want to make sure we realize here in New York City that this fear-mongering is a blueprint. When stop and frisk was stopped, it was the same thing. We
Central
need
Park
that
5,
to
for
control.
example, right?
Exactly. When the RFK Foundation started bailing out women and children, you can't do that because crime is going to increase and all of that. But nothing happened.
Right.
So what we're seeing here is this day of what back in the day we used to Willie Horton to pull furlough opportunities out of the correctional system that allows us to reintegrate.
Right.
So we're just having a repeat. They used the same blueprint. Just this time we got some smart people at the table that we're no longer willing to allow them because we didn't have platforms like this back then to talk about this and how it impacts. But it's actually the same blueprint, and again, it's to keep us oppressed.
So what do we do really quickly, right? What are some of the things that we can do, right, to kind of counter that narrative, right, this lifting up of something negative around bail reform? What are some of the things we can do?
So we're definitely keeping our voices front and center. We're challenging them. We're asking questions of, and even in some cases, it's been the DA, the way they're charged. They could have charged different based on the situations, but they chose to charge in a way that it fell into the category of no cash bail. But then when people talk about it, they're saying, but you know, there was one incident where a reporter asked me, the guy was on tape shooting at a rival gang member, and he got an assault charge. And the attorney on the phone said, well, that was a DA charging. If you actually had him on film trying to attempted murder, that was a different charge. She said, but we're not going to advocate for anybody to be incarcerated, but there still were options and opportunities. And don't forget about the people who, of that 800 that was released, that actually did access substance abuse services they wouldn't have gotten had they sat there and languished on Rikers Island. So we got to tell the story of the 797 while they're talking about the 3.
Got it. Exactly so I want to segue into voting, right? I know we're at a critical juncture right now, right? The census is coming out for 2020, right? People are going to be counted in some way, which will determine whether or not federal monies are allocated to our communities. Talk to us about the importance of voting. And I know, Julio, you're kind of like lifting this up as a thing, and we're all going to partner with you in some way to support that. Let's talk about that and then talk about the census and how important that is.
So all politics, first of all, and all are local. And it's important that we get the right representatives on board, right? In our communities, the unfortunate reality, I'm from the South Bronx, is we don't vote. We have some of the lowest voter turnout in the country. And I think we don't vote, again, because I think there's this hopelessness that sometimes exists.
Which is historical, right?
Historical hopelessness that, you know, it doesn't seem like it's going to get better.
Right.
It doesn't seem like if I vote for someone, my immediate circumstances will change. And I think it's important for us to begin to at least empower our people. Civic engagement, talking to them about what the power of the right to vote actually means. And what does it mean in our community, from federal resources to local resources, to having a representative that actually is going to listen to our needs. Right. You know, as a nonprofit leader, you know, it's like hat in hand to each and every person. Oh, can you fund what we do? And you get to a point after 20 years where that narrative should change. Come to us, right? 2 million strong across the country, right? And say, we now are voting in a block, right? We are now conscious around what we're doing, and we want to hear what your platform is around criminal justice and justice issues and homelessness and income equality. We want to have a different conversation. And I think the only way that happens is if we restore the right to vote, not only for folk on parole that we've been able to do, but while they're still inside. We should not forfeit our right to vote. Our right should never be forfeited, right? We've committed a crime. Did that now dehumanize and take every strip of every single right that we was constitutionally have? So I just think it's important that our communities really begin to look at the vote, really begin to understand what this is about, you know, and we have to be the educators, right? We have to figure out how do we do the civic engagement in a way where people understand it. You know, we go into the prisons now. One of the things we do is say, first thing I want you to do is I want your families to vote. I want us to have an impact. I want folk to know that where did these 5,000 extra votes come in this community? It came from us, right? Because I think that's when folk will start listening. But the and again, this is, as you know, there's some folk who've done this 30 years ago when I was locked up trying to move this. So I take zero credit for any of this, you know. But now is the moment in time. I believe just now, we're not going to have this window of opportunity again. Historically, this has never happened where mass incarceration is sexy, where we're thinking about voting, you know. We were talking about that earlier, 20 years ago, you know. We were like hiding in the shadows, you know, when we came home trying to do this work. Nobody was, yo, man, I did 12 years. No, you know, you didn't say that. We're trying to slide into a job and be quiet, you know. But now is an opportunity to really not only, you know, bear those scars, but to show the world, you know, there was humanity always there. You know, we made some wrong choices. We should have the right to vote restored, and restored for everyone, folk inside as well. I think some states are showing some great examples of that. But in New York, more importantly, at least, we have to get civically engaged and get our communities involved in this process, be there and educate.
I'll tell you a quick story. When I came home, got off parole, I went and voted, and I went as a family. My youngest son and my wife, we went and voted. And I made it my business to take my son with me in the booth. Because I remember when I was young, I didn't ever remember my father telling me about voting. I never went to a polling place. I always felt like voting was for other people, like that wasn't a right afforded to me. And so from the point of my getting off parole to today, we still vote as a family. Because I wanted my son to know this isn't for just privileged people. This is for all of us. You have this right to vote. Now you need to exercise it, because exercising that right to vote means that you get a representative who is listening to you. You get a representative who understands your concerns and your needs, and will be able to speak to that. So I'm all on board with, like, we have to mobilize, educate, and engage. And Deanna and Vivian did something that was so amazing in 2019 that has never happened in this country, but they did it, and they did it in a big way. And I want y'all to talk about it, because we need to lift that up.
You're talking about the town hall meeting?
Yes.
And I know we talked about it like last episode, but that's what it means, obviously, to be like this harbinger, this forerunner, right? And not like bowing down in the face of these challenges in that way too. And you know, I know we can talk about this all day, right? And I would love to highlight that, the idea about the town hall meeting. And I know for our listening audience, you can definitely look at our last episode where you all talked about it. What I really want to get to in our last few minutes is something that Vivian, you raised up, right? This idea of capacity building and leadership. And I'd love to hear each of your thoughts, right? Because we know that in 2020, with the next 5 to 10 years or so, nonprofit leadership is going to be changing. And so I know, Vivian, talk to us about that as a start off, right? Yeah. Your thoughts on like capacity building leadership. Why is it so important? And then we'll go around to everyone else.
Sure. So what I've noticed over the last 20 years since I've been doing this work, the more we came out of the shadows, Julio, from when we first started, when it was just a very small number of people who were either in leadership in existing organizations or who started organizations, as we elevated and built solid organizations with good infrastructure and got more and more publicity and were able to grow organizations and hire people and make changes and provide services, that was a great thing. And the word spread, right? The word spread both inside prisons and outside of prisons. And it was both a success and there are some challenges that came with that. One of the challenges is that now everybody who's in prison, knowing that they're going to get out one day, go, oh, I know what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to get out and I'm going to start an organization, right? So you got 2 million people sitting behind prison. So, and we're going to have 2 million organizations. Well, actually, the best way to move into leadership is to find a space that's working on the things that you care about and learn and grow and learn what it really means to start an organization, to run an organization, and build your capacity. And you know what? You may find that your role is, you have a different role than running an organization. You may be better at something else. But to start out, come out the gate saying you're going to start an organization is maybe not the best solution.
It's aspirational, right?
It's
but it's not every job with reality.
It's aspirational and it's possible.
Right,
but it's not possible without connecting to people who are already doing that and without learning some things. Right. And those of us who are in these positions, who have done that work, who have sometimes suffered some serious consequences, no sleep at night, health problems, all the consequences of giving your whole self to something can mentor and teach and build the capacity of those who are coming up. Because quite frankly, what we want is a whole another bench of people who can come up behind us and take over the successful organizations that are already in existence rather than reinventing the wheel.
Sure.
We want to turn over our organizations to other people who are directly impacted and not to other people who are waiting in line to get our jobs.
Yep. Stan, I know you want to talk about that.
I think as service providers in this space, that ought to be our responsibility to build a bench, to build a continuation of strong leadership based on values, based on vision, based on motivation and engagement, that for the next 10, 20 years, as people are coming out, or for those who are in the work right now, in this space right now, building out that leadership so that when opportunities come about for people to lead and head organizations, there's a bench to fill those voids. And I think it's all of our responsibility, and it has been, I know, that we've all been working on. How do you build your bench? Who's your second? How do you mentor somebody so they understand the business operations of running a nonprofit, not just the fundraising or the advocacy or the service providing, but how do you run successfully an organization?
Deanna, I see you smiling.
Yeah, because that's so in line with, of course, Just Leadership being a leadership organization that invests in the leadership of directly impacted individuals to build their capacity. So one of the things is we're really taking a look at what is our responsibility to the leaders who come through our Leading with Conviction training. Are we giving them access and an understanding of what policy is, how to communicate from an organization or a brand as a person yourself? But what's the introduction to real capacity building around organization? And do we start to create some of those C-suite programs of intro to board, sitting on a board, actually executive director? So what is our responsibility? Because sometimes people come through Just Leadership and we focus on the 3 pillars of change, the 3 theories of change, with the first one being self and how you show up in spaces of, the criminal justice system. But when people leave, they think, oh, I'm a leader because Just Leadership said that. It was like, no, because
it's a process.
And what I realized, people aren't leaders individually in their space, but there's a difference because some people put leadership with a title. And just because a person has a title does not make you a leader. So actually having that understanding in how we, again, start to create those individuals who are going to come up behind us and take over the organizations. Because one of the things I realize people don't understand, Julio spoke to it, asking for funding ain't fun. And if it becomes 2 million organizations, well, the field's already crowded. Let's just be honest. And the funding is not, and this is not going to continue to be sexy.
Right, sure.
And again, we're having leaders come into this space when the funding's plentiful, but they don't realize 20 years ago we was doing this when there wasn't no funding. So that opportunity may come back around. How are you going to stick and stay and actually be recognized in that space when that happens?
Sure. And Julio, we were talking about that when you were sitting over there, the very same thing, Julio. Your thoughts on that?
You know, and again, getting out 20 plus years ago and being one of those folk who say, I want to start something, you know, realizing I couldn't work for nobody, you know. It was, so I'm the guy they talking about. And I would advise you don't do it. But no, I think some of the things when we talk about leadership and that leadership gap, it's making sure that, as you know, Exodus, 90% of my team is directly impacted. And that was before, again, it was sexy, right? I said there's talent, there's a talent pool here. I believe I can do something, I believe we can train, and we can tell the world that we are more than the worst moment of our lives, right? That we can tell the world that because we were incarcerated, our minds weren't taken away. And I think it was important to make that statement the way we've made that statement and continually to build the infrastructure within. But when we talk about, we do this exercise, it's called developing the leader within. Because I think the first thing we have to do is develop ourselves,
like
right?
to Deanna's point, which is one of the
you know what I mean?
right?
I think we can't, you know, we did this or we did that. Different set of skills that you need to lead an organization, to lead a nonprofit. And leadership does it, you know, not only in the nonprofit space, but as we said, when we talked about the vote, you know, 60-something council seats will be up for re-election in the next 2 years. We need some leaders in those seats. We need people who understand the dynamic of the city to be there and be present, and they need to be directly impacted.
Got it. Vivian, Stan, Deanna, Julio, it's never enough time, right? Never enough time. Always great to talk with all of you. We'll certainly have you back on soon as we get updates. But I just want to close, and I want to thank you all for giving us your thoughts and observations about criminal justice reform in 2019 and what 2020 will bring. And I thank you, the viewers, for joining us for all of the thought-provoking discussion. In the meantime, on behalf of the Fortune Society, we thank you so much for tuning in to both sides of the bars. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org. That's fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Andre Ward, and I appreciate you joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars.